Welcome to Marketing, Media, and Money, your go-to podcast for proven profitable strategies, secrets, and resources from industry experts and global influencers to help you scale your business, shorten your learning curve, and stand out in a crowded, noisy marketplace. Here's your host, award-winning marketing and media strategist and international speaker, Patty Farmer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. And I'm really excited today because we're going to be talking about some of my favorite topics. Marketing, of course, and sales, which I'm sure is one of your favorite. So let's see now. What if we could master the art of sales and marketing to not only stand out in a crowded digital landscape, but also create deeper, more meaningful connections with your audience? Imagine turning every interaction into a lasting impression, leveraging authentic storytelling and crafting content that captivates, all while staying ahead of the evolving trends and elevating your brand while making every opportunity count. So I hope that sounds good to you, because that's what we're going to dive into today with our guest. And let me tell you a little bit about him, because I'm really excited to have him. So John Golden is a globally recognized thought leader in sales and marketing, a renowned speaker and business strategist. With over 1,500 video interviews conducted for Sales Pop, a leading online sales magazine, YouTube channel, and podcast, his platform is ranked in the top 2% of podcasts globally. He's also the Amazon best-selling author of Winning the Battle for Sales, Lessons on Closing Every Deal from the World's Greatest Military Victories, and Social Upheaval, How to Win at Social Selling. So we've got a lot we're going to dive into, so make sure you have your pen and paper out, as I'm sure we're going to have some writer-downers, so to speak. So, John, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, listen, thanks very much, Patty, for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I am too. So let's just dive right in. So you have shared with me that there are 5, not 1, but 5 proven strategies to maximize every interaction. Can you share them with my audience? Because we're just going to jump right in. 5.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Absolutely. Well, I'll list out the 5, and then we can go back through some of them. But
sure.
The first one is choosing how you turn up, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Choosing how you turn up. The second one is checking your baggage. 3 is being present. 4 is knowing your own triggers, and 5 is owning the lasting impression. So they're very, very simple, but sometimes kind of overlooked.
Sometimes the most simple ones are the ones that are most overlooked, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for 100%, absolutely.
They do. I think that a lot of times, especially the trigger one, I think people don't really get the triggers, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is really important. But once you actually know, I love it when there's like a framework, right? Here's 5. You just have to know those 5, and that really can actually help. And I think that really, really works. But what strategy, if we were going to do it, what strategy would you recommend if we were going to say adapting communication styles to resonate with diverse audiences effectively? Because, sometimes we have the most diverse audiences more and more, but really communication style is so important along with emotional intelligence, but really adapting communication style. So which strategy, maybe it's one of those 5, or maybe you have another strategy, John, do you recommend?
Yeah. Well, I think Patty, it all starts with, and I hate to use this because it sounds like a buzzword, but it's not, authenticity, because it's been talked about so much recently. It has turned into a buzzword. It was even I think it was Merriam-Webster's word of the year at one stage. However, let me grab that back from being a buzzword to what it really is. And I think choosing how you show up and how you turn up every day is so critical. And this isn't something I'm going to take credit for. This was something that, from interviewing those people, that I gathered along the way, was how you start your day is incredibly important. And unfortunately, today, a lot of us, like a lot of people's typical day starts: wake up, roll over, grab the phone, right? Oof. Not even say hi to maybe your significant other or whoever happens to be beside you, whatever. No, just grab your phone and immediately, either you're on the news or you're on social media. And the problem is, number one, the news is there to provoke you, right? It's not really there to inform you anymore. It's there to provoke you. So, it doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. it's there to provoke and to get clicks, right? So immediately if you click on the news, immediately you're in a bit of a vortex in your mind. In the similar fashion, if you jump on social media first thing in the morning, hey, I see an old colleague of mine standing beside his Lamborghini, and I'm like, oh man, look, he's doing really well, and I'm not doing as well as him. Now it turns out he's not even his Lamborghini, but but at that stage, I don't know that, right? But the thing is, I have now set myself, I've started my day, and I'm in a bad place already because I'm aggravated by the news. Maybe I've got a little bit of jealousy or whatever around the social media, or just feeling dissatisfied, or I'm feeling, not as good or not as worthy or whatever it is. So it's like I said, this is not a simple or easy thing. It's simple, but it's not easy, because simple and easy don't equate often. But if you can start looking at how do you start, especially on a business day, right? If you've got calls ahead of you, if you've got marketing things you need to do and you need to talk to people, ask yourself, how are you starting your day? Are you putting yourself in the best possible position? So perhaps instead of reaching for your phone, maybe spend a few moments just in gratitude. That's always a good one. Hey, you woke up. That's always a good thing. You woke up in a comfortable bed in a nice accommodation and whatever, and you have a job to go to. Hey, gratitude. You'll find yourself in a much better place when you go into your day. But I would say, or you can do meditate or whatever. You can do whatever you want. Find your own routine. Maybe it's just sitting in silence, having your coffee without reading anything, but just thinking. But really pay attention to how you start your day, because how you start your day predicts how the rest of your day is going to go, to be honest. And if you start in a distracted place, then all of your communications after that are going to come from a distracted and a little bit, aggravated point of view.
I agree with you. And I have a hard, fast rule for myself, which is that I never start my day by looking at my email, which I think is what a lot of people do. They grab their phone and they're immediately looking at their email. And my point of view is that my inbox is everybody else's agenda for me. That's everybody else's agenda for me. So I never look at that. I have a process in the morning that I go through of the things that are the most important to me. And only after that do I start worrying about what my inbox says, because I like to start my day working with my favorite client and the most important client, and that's me.
Yes. Right? I love that. And the other part I would add to this too is, I think it's Psychology Today or one of those. Anyway, there's a statistic that 70%, and some people put it higher, of your daily self-talk is negative, right? And that doesn't matter whether you are, whether you are struggling in your life with nothing, or whether you're a billionaire. It's the same. You still 70%, 80% is negative self-talk. So that's another thing. So before you pick up the phone or get on Zoom or however you engage with your prospects or with your customers or whatever, is to consciously kind of catch yourself and say, okay, I'm away with this negative self-talk. I'm going to focus on positivity, and I'm not going to use, you remember we always say, past is prologue, right? Well, I'm not going to believe that, because it's often not, right? It's maybe things that happen in the past. Maybe I had a negative experience last week when I did a call with somebody, and I'm bringing that with me. I have to consciously say, no, this is a brand new call. This is a new opportunity. So I'm going to go into it with positivity. And the thing is, at the end of the day, Patty, you can tell when somebody's feeling positive or energized as opposed to the other. And the thing is, and if you say like, no, I'm okay, I'm going into it, I think I'm okay. Well, guess what? If you're anxious, if there's some physiological reaction, if your body's telling you, no, you're not. So get yourself, and I'm not being all foo-foo about like, power of positive thinking. I'm just saying, give yourself the best opportunity by going into every interaction with a clean slate, right? And just being positive and say, this is going to be great. Whatever the outcome is going to be a good outcome, and I'm going to make sure it is, and regardless of whether it may not be the one I want particularly, but I'm going to make sure that something positive comes out of this.
Well, we can't control everything that happens to us. What we can control is our reaction to it, right?
Absolutely.
And what we do. Pinterest, is a social, everybody thinks it's a social media platform, but it's really a search engine, right?
Right.
However, I have a secret board on my Pinterest, right? I have a secret board. So instead of doing a vision board, which has been around for a very, very long time, I'm way too busy to cut up magazines and all that. So like I do it on Pinterest and I do it digitally, and I have an amazing vision board. And I have more than one. I have one vision board for what my goals are, and I have one that are positive, powerful affirmations. And every morning when I sit down to my desk, I go to that vision board and I actually look at what my goals are, and I actually let that sit with me. Then I actually go to the affirmation one. I actually look through that, and I always, always, always read the affirmation one before I get on any calls, especially if it's a sales call, right? And I want to make sure that I am in the most positive place. I'm focused on, what the long-term goals are, not what might have annoyed me this morning, when I, or whatever and stuff. So I have found that really works for me, to be able to do it. And I know, a lot of people love to actually cut them up and do all that kind of stuff. And I think that's really, really great too. I just happen to never be able to find anything that says the words that I actually want. So I have found that digitally I can do that a lot better. Yeah. But I have to tell you, I find that starting my day by putting all the things that I can going my way, because I can't control what's going to happen after that.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a perfect example. And I know some people are like affirmations, whatever, but I mean, they do work. I know they do absolutely work. And I would advise people, just give it a go. Here's the great thing about it. It's not going to do you any harm. But I tell you what, the other stuff is, so why not just do that? Even if you don't believe in them or whatever, it's a good thing to do. Or whatever it takes. Maybe listen to a song that uplifts you and just reminds you of good times. Maybe call or text somebody who who's always pumps you up and say, hey, listen, I've got this call coming up. I'm kind of nervous about it. I just wanted to reach out and get that person go, you're going to be great. You're going to knock. Just simple things like that to put yourself in the right frame of mind. So yeah, I love what you're doing. I love the vision board. Yeah, I never really understood Pinterest, to be honest. I used to call it digital quilting.
I actually used to say it was Facebook for weekends. That's what I used to say before. But it is a search engine, so it is very, very good. But I totally get it.
Absolutely.
Let's kind of flip the switch a little bit.
Yeah.
So Sales Pop is the top 2% globally. I love that. My podcast is in the 1.5%, so globally. So I'm almost there.
I've got to go. I'm going to be following behind you.
So what's your advice for podcasters? So for a second, let's talk about podcasting. So what's your advice for podcasters who are trying to find their unique voice in a crowded market? So, I like to say all the time, we are in a very noisy, crowded marketplace. And while I agree with you, authenticity is a buzzword. It's a buzzword for a reason, right? And stuff though. But really, I feel like finding that unique voice is very, very important for me this year. Everybody always does at the beginning of the year. What is your word of the year? And I always have a word and then a how. And my word this year was discernment, and the how was unapologetically.
I love it.
That was word by word. So I feel like having a unique voice, not being apologetic about it at all, about what my voice is and stuff. Those are the things that are going to help you to stand out in a crowded market. It's kind of like what you said earlier about how the news, they just want to get you all riled up and they want to polarize you and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is you have to stand for something. Like, what is your point of view? So share your point of view. Nobody says you have to be polarizing when you do it, but it just needs to be uniquely yours.
Yeah, and actually, Patty, we released a white paper, a kind of white paper last year on podcasting based on our experiences, because we started the podcast back in 2018, and I'm up to about, there's 2,000 videos. I think there's about 1,800 of them are interviews at this stage. So that's something I'd like to share with your audience. If you'd like, I'd love to give you that.
I would love that.
Yeah, I'll give that to you. So what I would say is, this is for me the bottom line, and we talk about authenticity, and that is, number one is be yourself, right? I always quote my compatriot Oscar Wilde, who said, be yourself because everyone else is taken, right? So I think number one is really ask yourself, who are you, right? And for instance, if you're a very analytical person and you like to get into the details and the weeds and you're very kind of serious, then be a serious analytical person. And if you're an expert in something, then, maybe you want to do a podcast where it's just you explaining stuff because you're an expert in it and you're going into the weeds. Or maybe you're a curious person and you want to interview people, and that's a good way to go, because then you that's what I do. I mean, I learn from everybody I interview. It's the most wonderful experience, to be honest. I feel blessed. I feel totally blessed because, my mind is always full of like, oh, I just interviewed this person and they told me this and it's fantastic. So I would say, like, be who you really are. Don't try to be somebody else. I have seen people who started podcasts and I talk to them off air and they're a different person than I've seen them on air. And I'm like going, no. And especially because sometimes if you think, oh, like I need to be controversial, but that's not really who you are. And it's forced. Or I'm going to be really funny, but I'm not that funny, right? I'm not naturally that funny. Or I'm going to swear because I'm going to be edgy, but I'm not. But again, that's false. So I would say before you start, like, decide who you are and what you want to project to the world, but please don't create a persona, because you'll never be able to carry that through. Honestly, you'll never be able to carry it through, because the other part I would say to podcasters, and this is what I've talked to many podcasters, especially, I get asked all the time for advice, and people will call me and they'll say, I started my podcast and I'm 10 episodes in and nobody's watching, they're not going anywhere, and I go, that's okay. So are you happy with the content? Are you getting better? Have you gone on other people's podcasts? Have you listened to other podcasts? Are you learning? Are you looking at your own podcast back? Are you seeing what you can do? And then I say to them, this is like everything else in life. There's no shortcuts. It takes dedication, and you've got to be in it for the long haul. And guess what? Unless you're a celebrity, or unless you're well known, or unless you got a boatload of money to spend on promotion, doing it organically is going to take time. And so you have to be willing to go through that process and do everything you can to be SEO, all the stuff that you can do that's within your control. But keep going, because I think it's around 10 to 20. This is just off the top of my head. This is what I feel from people who've talked to me. I feel a lot of people quit after 10 or quit after 20 because...
It's a statistic for sure.
Yeah. And I say to people, if you really believe in this medium and you really want to do it properly, then you got to take the long view, and you have to be prepared to build it up. Just like if you started a business in the morning, I'm sorry, your business isn't going to take off like overnight. It's going to take a while. And I think that's part of the problem. And this is a bigger issue than just podcasting, Paddy, but we live in this shortcut culture, right? Where everything is instant and people think, and they're bombarded on social media by these things like, oh, sign up for this and blah, 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 and you'll be making $10 million in 2 days, or whatever. Or, sign up for this and I'll give you and so in our heads, we're thinking that everything should happen quickly, but you got to pull yourself out of that nonsense and go, anything worthwhile takes time, number one. And unfortunately, the best things in life often take longer than you would like. So you got to have that resilience.
Have to really realize that too. So people who are falling for things like that, and I'm in marketing and I really hate it when I see other marketing gurus saying that kind of stuff, because I always like to tell my clients, my colleagues, I'm sure this is something you do too. It's like, listen, I can help you shorten your learning curve for sure, but you still have to do the work. Yeah. You just don't have to do it alone.
Yeah.
And stuff though, but you do still have to do the work. And I don't care what technology. I am an AI expert, but with that said, none of the technology, one thing, is going to replace building relationships with people, right? It's just not going to. Relationship marketing is where it's at. And now more than ever, people want that human connection. So I feel like don't try to shortcut it. That's why, how like sometimes people think, oh, I don't have to do anything. I'll just do paid ads.
No.
Right? It has to be organic if you want it to be sustainable.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're in it for the long haul and you want it to be sustainable, you need to do it the right way. So I think that being really, really clear and knowing that is really where it's at. So you can do a multiple of things. You just have to know that, yes, they're going to take time, but when you do it right, it is sustainable. And I think that's really what's important.
And I think the other thing too, Paddy, is to ask yourself the why, because I feel like we do a lot of things today without asking the why first or exploring the why. So I think you got to ask yourself, why do I want to do this, or why am I doing this? What is the purpose? Do I have a clear purpose? Because if you're just thinking, I'll do podcasting and it'll generate me loads of leads because, I'll get loads of views online, or I'll get loads of listens and all of that. Well, I'm sorry, that's a little bit vague, and it's probably not going to work.
Because they're not intentional sometimes in doing it too. There's no intention. But also, I think for what you're saying, sometimes I think it's important, like, what are you not willing to do as well? Because I think that's a really important question. Because I know for me, there were really, really clear things. Like, because I have built my business on relationship marketing, I don't do any paid advertising. Zero. Now, do I think there's anything wrong with that? No. Do I think sometimes it's appropriate if you're having a launch or there's different things, and I help my clients with those things when it's appropriate? But for me, it's not how I built my business. It's not why I have 250,000 subscribers to my magazine. And because I have the huge community I have, it's taken me years and years to do it, but I value it and I treat them accordingly because I'm so thankful for the people who have kind of come along the journey with me, right? So you have to ask yourself what you're not going to do too. And then you have to kind of take out the noise of what everybody else is saying and just ask yourself, why are you doing it? What are you willing to do and what are you willing to not do? And be really, really clear on that. And I love that you're touching on that because I think
no, 100%. And I think that was a fantastic add-on there about what you're not willing to do, because I think that is critically important. Like, I decided I wanted my podcast to be clean. I wasn't going to swear on it, and I wasn't going to have guests swear on it, right?
Me too.
Just because I just thought, I want to appeal to the broadest audience. And quite frankly, there's so much, a lot of people do that, and quite frankly, I kind of grinds on me a little bit, but and being Irish, that might sound surprising. And I'm just thinking,
part of your brand anyway, right? I know sometimes people do it for their brand and stuff like that. And if that is your brand, that's great. Go be on podcasts where that is appropriate. It's not appropriate on mine either. So I agree with you for sure and stuff though. But I think, again, it's like what you're saying. Are you being intentional and trying to be on 100 podcasts and you don't even know who the audience is? Are they the right thing? I mean, look, you're a sales and marketing expert, and this is a marketing podcast. So it's appropriate, right? My audience is appropriate. They're looking for the type of things that you're going to share. I mean, it is good for you, good for me, and good for my audience, which of course is the name of the game about making sure that we serve our audiences right. So I think that being intentional, but you really can't be intentional if you don't know the answers to those questions. So I love that you're mentioning those, because you have to ask yourself those things first before you can actually really be intentional, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I love that you mentioned the value, valuing your audience, valuing the people who come on your podcast. I think that's also incredibly important, that respect piece. Like, if somebody comes on your podcast, make sure that you have good promotion in place for that you make it easy for them. Like what we do when somebody comes on our podcast is we provide them with all of the assets that they need to promote it for themselves, and that they can customize and they can do everything. It's all there for them. We let them, we build a profile. We say, does this include everything you want? We do our best to elevate them and promote them. And I think that's incredibly important as well. And to your point is, valuing the audience, it also means that you're discern. I love that word. You have your word of the year, discernment. That you're discerning about the people you have on and the things that you do. That you're always looking to bring real value to it, and you're looking to promote the expertise of the other person and bring their ideas out. So I think that's really important too.
Because I really love collaboration too. So I always love having people in my audience ask me what is it that they want? What are they looking for? And they tell me, and then I go find it, right? So I really love that. So thinking about content, right? So can you share a few tips for creating valuable, we're talking about value, right? Valuable, engaging content that, let's say, will consistency balance the quality with quantity when we're creating engaging podcast episodes that are going to keep those listeners coming back, right? Because it's all about creating that content for them, but we want it to be engaging and valuable. And I know for me, I am like John, I know this happens to you too. Like, we get pitched all the time, right? I mean, I'm sure you get pitched all the time too. And sometimes people will pitch me, and like, when they pitch me, I'm thinking, did you even
Yeah.
Never mind listen to my podcast. Did you even read the description of my podcast? Like, what would ever make you think that would be somebody that would be on my podcast? And I'm all about like having people, pitch me somebody that would be a great guest. I love that. But, do your due diligence, right, first. And so for me, when I'm pitching my clients or myself, like I always do my due diligence first. And I always have some really great tips. And I love what you said about the assets because I really do that too. Yeah. What I am always looking for as a guest, right? Because it's always about being a good guest as well as being a good podcast host, right? And a lot of times the people that come on as guests, they actually have podcasts too, right? And so, that's always a good thing too. But I always feel like I want to be on a podcast. And when it is all and done, that they're like, oh my gosh, Patty, like you gave so much value. You really promoted it. Like I want them to walk away and think, wow, I wish every single guest came on and was as prepared, showed up having value and then promoted it afterwards. And for me, promotion isn't just the day after the podcast comes out, right?
No. It's absolutely ongoing. And I agree with you. And I think just on the last bit on advice around podcasting before we talk about content is I think before you start your podcast even or in conjunction with it, you should go on some podcasts because you learn a lot from being a guest. It really helps you as a host. And it's a great way to get some, to get some insight and learn a little. And then maybe when you start off your podcast, maybe invite somebody on that but they have good content so that you can kind of ease your way into it rather than, come on with a stranger. Maybe you haven't interviewed people before. You're not that sure. So just do some practical things at the beginning to set yourself up as much as you can. And then on content, I agree with you. I think you also have to be creative because as you said, there is so much noise out there, right? And I said to somebody, I said to somebody recently, they called me up about something and I made the comment, I said, if everybody's creating content, then who's actually consuming it? And they were like, whoa, well, I never thought about that. And I said, are you producing content? They said, oh yeah, I put out all this stuff. And I said, how much of other people's stuff do you read? And they were like, well, not that much. And I said, point in case, or case in point. So I think quality, as you said, quality is very important. And I think being a little creative, like you said, I mean, I do mine on sales and marketing and entrepreneurship and stuff like that, leadership. It's all interconnected. But like a year ago, somebody came to me, as I said, I get around mental health. And I was like, that's interesting. And then I realized and I looked into it a little bit and then I thought, hang on, mental health and salespeople, like it's a big thing, right? Because they face a lot of rejection and so on. So I did this series around tying mental health into the workplace and into sales and stuff. So it's an adjacent topic, but actually when you bring it in and you connect it to what you're doing, it becomes a very robust. And it that series did extremely well. And it does really well today. I have a playlist of mental health stuff around work, around sales and just in general, but because sometimes we forget that salespeople, marketers, they're people too, right?
Exactly.
First and foremost. So I would say, be creative and put a little bit of thought into it, especially if you want to stand out. And like I said, don't be gimmicky, but put some thought into it. And maybe the best place to first start is to say, if I came across this, would it interest me? Would it bring value to me? And if I can't say, yeah, actually this would, well, then don't do it. Then think again and go back to the drawing board and figure it out. But I believe you can do quality and quantity pretty well if you balance it. But if your focus is always on the quality, over time you get to see the right kind of people. And as you said, the beauty of this, and and probably the same when it happened to you, when we first started the podcast, we used to outreach and we'd ask people and we'd track them down and we'd be all excited when they'd come. And then it switched. Suddenly it was all coming inbound, podcast booking agencies, individual, and today I'm inundated, to be honest. We're inundated and
for sure.
Inundated. However, it allows us to be, back to your word of the year, and I'm going to steal that one now, is discernment. It's always back to discernment. So you can do quality and quantity if you make sure that you have some measures to say whether this is going to be quality or not, or whether I'm just throwing out something because I can.
No, I agree with you. Just this morning, I had somebody that had pitched somebody to me, and literally she's pitched me like 6 times. Like, I have to tell you, I have to at least say that she's, keeps working it. And finally I took the time and I wrote back and I said, this is the reason why. Because I know for a fact that you have not even looked at my description, because you would automatically know that this was not the right person for me.
Yep.
Now, I have relationships with people at booking agencies. They know exactly what I'm looking for. And when they pitch me, like half my work is done. They have already done that for me and stuff. And I trust them. We built a trusted relationship, right? And stuff there. So I just want to say, I don't understand why, if that's what somebody does for a living, like, how is that working for them? That's what I'm saying. I'm like, is that working for you? Because
I'm sure
that what you're pitching me right now is like something that you think that my audience would really like. And I have to tell you, that's a surefire way to lose listeners, is to throw people on your podcast just because somebody asked you to, when they are not, fit for your audience, right? So it is always about making sure that it's a fit. And it's our job as the podcasters or, publishers of a magazine or your blog or whatever the case may be. It is our job to tie the topic in by doing our work.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's like what you just said about the mental health. Somebody else might have just said, oh, no, that doesn't fit. But you took the time and really thought about it, which I have to say kudos to you for that, John, because really, honestly, you had to really think about it and say, oh, well, actually. And then, of course, when you interview them, the questions that you asked them were tied into that. Yep. So I'm sure your listeners were like, oh, wow, I never thought of that, which I think is what people really like. And that's what I like.
Yeah.
What I love is when somebody makes me shift my perspective or gives me an insight and I'm like, wow, I never really thought of that. And, you know how like for a long time, people would say, I would hear this phrase, oh, I want to be in a room, or I want to be interviewed, or whatever the case may be, with like-minded entrepreneurs. And I say, yes, I get that. But really, I want to be around diverse-minded entrepreneurs. I want somebody who's going to make me go, oh, wow, I hadn't thought of that. I want to have a guest on that's going to say something that when I get off, I'm going to be like, man, I want to listen to that again. And I'm going to do a little bit of research on that. That was really phenomenal, because isn't that why we're having guests on?
Yeah. And getting back to the comment that you made a moment ago about, I'm the same. We've got great relationships with podcast booking agencies now who understand our audience and the type of people. But the other ones, and there are plenty out there that, who inundate us, and it's just like, it's bad marketing, right? They're scattered on, they're not target mark. All the things we know as marketers you should do is you should say, okay, this is the right profile of podcast for this guest, and then market to that podcast, to that podcast profile.
Exactly.
Rather than, let me just get a list of business podcasts and spam them all, right? And unfortunately, that's what's happening. And that's not how anybody who's with the...
And those people are paying those booking agencies. And that's the scary part. They're actually paying them to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, before you go on a podcast booking agency, maybe do a little bit of research and see, what are some of the ones that... look into them and find out what are good ones. Maybe reach out to other podcasters and say, do you work with any podcast agencies? Which are the ones you'd recommend? Because to be honest...
Well, that's a really good tip. Hope everybody wrote that down. See how he said that? He said, check with podcast agencies and see who have they worked with, or other podcasters that have you worked with them, and find out which ones are good ones. Because I'm sure if you reach out to them and say, oh, John told me that he's worked with you, you send him really great people. I mean, they are getting paid to pitch you. Yeah. So they would probably love to have a relationship with somebody and say, yeah, so that was really a value add right there, John.
Oh, thank you. And like I said, because you also need to consider the fact that if you go with shall we say, less than stellar agency, it's going to harm your brand. So remember, don't go into this also from this a feeling of like, oh, I'm small, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm whatever, and I'm going to believe whatever the podcast. No, do your homework, because it'll affect your brand. If they start just scattergun pitching you to everybody, and you'll be pushed aside, and people won't want to come on your podcast because they'll think, oh, that's coming from that annoying agency.
Exactly. And there's so many ways to check stuff now, right? So I think that is really important. And I think a lot of what we're talking about here really is credibility and authority, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you an expert or do you have authority? And really reinforcing that credibility. And I know you talk about that a lot. So
Yeah.
I have actually heard you talk about the non-negotiable elements, the non-negotiable elements of a professional digital footprint. I love that. You said that there were 6 critical impressions.
There are.
And I want you to share them with my audience because they're phenomenal.
Yeah. The first thing is an obvious one, right? You only get one time to create a first impression. We've heard that drilled into us since we were little, right? But nowadays, that first impression is often a digital impression. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. I'm just reminding you, check your digital presence. Have you updated your LinkedIn profile lately? Have you looked at here's a good tip. Maybe do a search on yourself and see where you show up digitally, because you might have a wonderful LinkedIn profile. You might have great and then maybe you have an Instagram account of you, I don't know, getting drunk and falling off at the front of the boat or something, right? That's completely at odds with your brand, right? So check your brand across all social media, because you only get one chance to make a first impression. And the first thing people are going to do, obviously, is search you. So if everything isn't aligned, you're running the risk that they're going to hit on the one digital presence that you don't want them to, or you wish they didn't, that maybe even forgotten exists. So that's the very first thing. Make sure it's credentialing, and make sure it portrays you as a qualified and knowledgeable professional, right? So really pay attention to that bit. To that bit. The second piece I always go, and this is where I'm a little different from some people in that I feel like the first time you interact, like when you reach out, right, you try to make connections, whether as a marketer, as a salesperson, whatever, is just be professional in your communication, especially in your initial contacts, right? Be professional in how you speak, professional in how you write, because we're in this kind of casual culture where people think it's so cash now, and because we text and we put emojis and we don't put like proper words, and people somewhat carry that over, and they think it's okay now to be like, my mother, God rest her, used to say, "Hey is for horses," right? So I can't stand when I get an email that starts with, "Hey."
Oh, right. Hey, rock star. Sometimes like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. Those things like that. And I'm thinking like, what's wrong with either just going, "Hello, John," or "Dear John"? My goodness, put "dear." It's still applicable. It's nice. It may be a little bit of a throwback, but something? It's nice. And you'll never, and here's the thing, anyone listening out there, you will never, I guarantee you 100% on this, you will never get dinged for being too professional, but you'll get dinged for being too casual.
For sure. I mean, there's a time and a place for everything, and that is just not it. That is not it. People want to be seeing that you are professional, because you got to remember, some of these people, they may have a podcast, they may have stages, they may do events. If you're not professional in their first interaction with you, that's a communication. Like, it's probably not going to get anywhere else. And I always say, before I ever put anybody on my stage or in my magazine or any of those things, like, those things matter to me, because guess what? Just like when you were in high school, remember when your mom would say to you, "Oh, if you're on the football team or you're a cheerleader, like, you're representing the school," right?
Yeah. And I think that's it. I mean, I think sometimes people forget. I mean, you're representing your organization, or if you're an entrepreneur, you're representing your brand, and maybe you are your brand. So make sure your brand is consistent, right? So it's like, like I said, if your brand is a serious and knowledgeable one, and then you send your first contact is some very like casual, whatever, that's totally at odds with it. It's people are going to notice that. It's going to jar. And I think the other thing too, and you alluded to this earlier, actually, Patty, is like, do some prep. Do some prep before you engage with people. Like, learn about their business, learn about them. As you said, if it's podcast, you want to be on their podcast, for goodness sake, listen to their podcast. Really, I mean, should be a basic thing, but as we know, that's not always the case. But do your prep work. And I find sometimes today, again, because we're in this shortcut culture, is that people tend to put aside. I often look at salespeople and I say, "Yeah, I can see you have a lot of meetings on your calendar, but where's the prep? where's the half hour you put away for prep for that meeting.
And if somebody's a speaker, it's even more so, right?
Even more so, absolutely. And so it's like understand who you're engaging with, understand the business, understand why you're engaging with them, and just do that prep work. Because literally I've had occasions when I've gone on to things and the first thing somebody has said to me is like, oh well, can you just kind of tell me a bit about yourself? And I'm going, for real? I mean, you didn't even look at my LinkedIn. You looked at nothing. I mean, you want me to?
Somebody told me the other day that blew me away. They were a podcaster.
Mm-hmm.
They were not a brand new podcaster, but they hadn't done a lot of podcasting. And they asked me to be on their podcast, and they didn't ask me for anything. Like, they didn't ask me for anything. And I said before I went on, I'm like, well, do you need anything from me? And they're like, no, I don't need an intro. And I'm like, what? They're like, no, I just have you come on and let you introduce yourself. And I'm thinking to myself, whoa, now that was so telling, right? Because you let somebody introduce themselves, you have no idea what they're going to say.
Absolutely.
That is like never going to happen on my podcast, right? You know what I mean? Like, why would you do that? Now, I just really feel like
it's kind of lazy.
In your audience, like they're showing up for you, like they're trusting you to have done the work.
That just comes off as a little bit lazy, I have to say.
Sure.
Yeah. And I agree with that. Absolutely. I mean, that's a crazy way to do it. So do your be proud of what you're doing, for goodness sake, and do your preparation work, right?
Exactly.
And another one I think, Patty, that is incredibly important is empathy, right? And we hear a lot about empathy and all of that, but I don't think sometimes people really understand empathy. And that is like, really kind of whoever you're engaging with, start to put yourself in their shoes and think, like, why are they doing this? What do they want to get out of this? What's important to them? And say, okay, now how can I make sure that I'm aligned with it? Or maybe I'm not, which is even better. Then I can say, okay, this isn't the right fit. But how can I be aligned with them? And how can I make this less about me and more about Patty, right? So I'm coming on your podcast. It's down to me to be my best, right? Because I need to know you have a podcast you have built up over many years. You're very proud of it. It's been fantastically successful. You're very protective, rightly so, of your audience and that. So I need to respect that and be empathetic towards you, and to make sure that I'm as fully prepared and I come with value. And I'm not just using this as a great opportunity. I'm not going, oh, what time is it? Oh, yeah, I better jump on this. What am I talking about?
Oh, my goodness, right?
Yes.
I think I just really believe that every single one of those is so true. And I know you said something earlier, because we keep going back to that buzzword authenticity, because it's such a buzzword. And it does play a role, right? There is a role. But also one of the other roles that I would like to talk about is really storytelling.
Yes.
Right. What role do you think storytelling plays in establishing that, that powerful brand that connects with your audience? So whether you're from an entrepreneur to a podcast to a speaker, it doesn't matter what you're doing. What role does storytelling play? Because I just think more than ever now, it is just so important. So where's your
100%. And I think, well, let's face it, most of us, like I'm Irish, right? We have there you go. Yeah. We have a very rich storytelling culture, right? That's how our history and all our myths and legends were handed down. And back in the day, the storyteller, the Shanachie, to give it its name in Irish, was considered one of the most important people, right? So poets and storytellers would go from village to town, and they'd be treated like today's rock stars when they turned up, and people would hang on every word, and the stories were deep and they had meaning, and it was bringing the knowledge of our ancestors through, and it's a wonderful thing. And most cultures are like that. It's like the native the First Nations in Australia. The native people there, dreaming the world into existence, and then the storytelling handed down. So it's innate in us. Storytelling is really what we relate to, and that's how we communicate as humans. Let's face it. When you talk to your friends, right? Say have a conversation with your friend. What are you doing 90% of the time? you're telling stories to each other, and that's what's fascinating. And therefore, I think it's absolutely critical. And therefore, I think you should also not underestimate the stories you have to tell, because this is another great thing that sometimes I engage with people and they ask me and they say, John, but I just don't have anything really interesting to say, or I haven't done that much. And I say, okay, let's step back for a second. Let's just go back in time. And and if I know them well enough, I'll say, well, what about when you did this and you came through that and you did that? I said, these are fascinating things. I said, everybody has stories to tell. You are where you are today. You have traveled many different roads to get here. You've had many different experiences along the way. Just take a moment to look back and think about the things and figure out how you can bring your experiences to bear into an environment like this, and how can you become an authentic storyteller by using your experiences and then aligning that. I mean, it's so good. Don't just turn up with, I mean, I could tell you loads of fascinating stories till the cows come home, but they maybe have no value to you. But, make sure that you, again, I'm going to go back to discerning. I just love that word now. You've got that embedded in my head.
Have it. It's my gift to you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Then figure out which of your stories and stuff which align to it. But I absolutely think that that's how we connect. Because one of the things that we do, Patty, and this is not just for the podcast, but for our other business, the CRM business Pipeline, is we believe in a win-win philosophy, right? We firmly believe in that. We don't believe, when we engage with customers, we want to come out with a good deal that everybody's happy with, and we want to support them and want everybody to be happy. And we just believe 100% in win-win. We don't believe in one side wins, the other side loses, or you go, put one over on you. Because we think that's extremely short-sighted. So again, I think going into it with, get your stories, be empathetic, and then when you do your podcast and when you do engage with people or you do your marketing, ask yourself, is this a win for them as well? Am I setting it up so both sides are gaining from this? It's a win-win. So everybody's going to go away saying, this was a great experience for both of us. I'm so glad we did this.
I love that so much, because I really feel like, like you're a sales expert, but like you just said about your CRM, I feel like stories are so important. And I have to tell you, when somebody sends me a newsletter, I love it when I open it up and it starts with a story, right? It starts with a story, and then they tie the story into whatever is their business, their area of expertise. So from both points of view, as a sales expert and as somebody who has a business that is in the CRM business, from both sides, that storytelling in sales is really, really important, right? Because what is the cliche that says facts tell, stories sell, right?
No, absolutely.
Which is so important, though. I don't want to hear that. What I want to know is, it's not about, like, what I always want to say is, like, because a lot of times salespeople, obviously, but, salespeople, they want to tell you, oh yeah, I did this and I did this and I did this. Now, credibility is important for sure. But the fact of the matter is, when people are hiring you, they're not hiring you for everything you did. What they're hiring you for is, what can you do for me if I hire you, right?
Yeah.
And stuff there. So when you're telling those stories, that's really a great way to be able to do it. So from both the sales expert side and from somebody from a CRM, really, because you're talking about getting people not just to be part of your list, but to stay on your list, because getting people on your list is the easy part. Getting them to stay on your list is a little bit harder, right? So when you're thinking about that, what are some tips you might be able to say about storytelling, which I think you already said one without even realizing it. Well, maybe you did realize it, is when you were saying, make sure that the story is relevant, right?
And I think that is the important part to start with, is to, if you're going to engage with somebody, let's get back to what we said before, do your research on that person and make sure that, and then maybe you've had a couple of interactions with them, and maybe gauge from those interactions. I mean, we have a lot of AI in our tool now that can give you all of this information so you can be fully prepared when you engage.
And they can't tell your stories for you.
No, they can't. That's the point I made. We look at it, AI, very much as the assistant to get you set up, and for you, the human relationship is the important part. But then, as I said, like, make sure that whatever stories or anecdotes or whatever you're going to tell are aligned to that person. So, for instance, like, I had this experience one time in a sales situation. This is a good one for you, and it absolutely aligns with what you were saying. I was running a company, and one of the senior salespeople asked me to come on a sales call with them. And their biggest customer at the time, like they had a huge deal with a medical devices company, shall remain nameless. Now, the sales call that we went on was for a company that supplied rocks, right? As in rocks, as in pebbles, big rocks, small rocks, whatever. Huge company. During the sales meeting, the salesperson started telling stories about working with the med device company. And literally, there was like 10 people in the room, and literally one of the prospects suddenly interrupted and said literally these words, I'll never forget, talk about killing something dead. But we sell stones. And literally basically said, stop telling us about all your fantastic experiences with the medical device company. We can't relate. It's completely not relevant to what we're talking about. So that's the point, is like, make sure your stories are relevant. Make sure they're, and people love problem solution stories. So again, don't make it about you. As you said earlier, don't say, I did this and I did that. Say, oh, I had a customer like you. They're in the same industry, blah, blah, blah. This is the issue they're having. Is this something that resonates with you? And if they say, yeah, they say, well, let me tell you the story of how they solved it, how we worked together and all of that. Now I'm engaged because you've checked, you've made sure it's relevant, and now it's something that's that I'm going to listen to.
And they're leaning in because they're thinking, oh, you might tell them something that might actually really help them.
Exactly, because personally, when salespeople engage with me, when they try to sell to me, I want to know what they've done with like people. I don't really care what they've done with people who aren't like me. I want to know what they've done. I want to know if there's something I'm missing. Is there oh, you did that with them. Oh, never thought about that. So it's so, so storytelling is so powerful. And the same in marketing, as you know, because a lot of brands, they put all these bumper stickers on their website, about what they are, and they have their vision statement, and they have their, their values, and they have we do this and we do that, and we're customer centric, which is the one I love. Until you call them about something and then you discover how customer-centric they really are.
Shouldn't everybody be customer-centric? I don't even think...
Yeah.
People say, oh, this is what stands me apart, what differentiates me. I'm like, really? Shouldn't everybody be that?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, until you call them when you have an issue and you discover how customer-centric they're not. But I say, tell the story about your company. Like, who are your company? Like, what principles do you really stand on? Like, forget values, principles. Where, what underpins you? Like, for instance... Pat, you may not be aware, but the Austrian School of Economics, right, which is a school of economic thought and underpins our approach to business, underpins our approach to our CRM, and we communicate that and we talk about that sometimes to people when it's relevant. But it's part of our story. So, like, people want to know, as you said, want to know that there's something about you, but something genuine, not the bumper stickers, please, but something genuine.
I 100% agree. Although, you want to know what? So, speaking of the story. Mm-hmm. One time I went on this podcast. This is where experience matters, right? One time I went on this podcast and the girl says to me, I will never forget it as long as I live. She says to me with no warning, she says, so Patty, how would you tell people what you do? And I would like you to tell us in 10 words or less, and you can't use any of your titles. So you can't say marketing, media, money. You can't do that. I want you to tell me in 10 words or less what it is you do without using any of your titles. And it was a live show.
Lovely.
It was a live show. And I was thinking, wow. Right. And I was actually kind of amazed. I actually opened my mouth. I told her what I did. I did it in exactly 10 words. Afterwards, I wrote them down. I thought, man, I need to add those to my bio. That was like a download from God. That I actually did it. But it was kind of a crazy question to put somebody on the spot and ask them, because people sometimes say that to me. Oh, Patty, what are you going to ask me? And I always say, I'm not Barbara Walters. I'm not trying to scoop you. I'm here to make you look good. Like, you're on my podcast because I want to spotlight you and the value that you bring, not like try to trip you up and stuff. So I think that is kind of funny, but I have to tell you, it's the stories. And I really love that. So, John, what would you say, like, how do you approach, like, learning and growth so that you maintain your edge, right? You're a leader in sales and marketing. So how do you like approach that in like a lesson that you've learned that has had a huge impact on you and how you approach your business today?
Well, one of the biggest ones is make no assumptions. That's just a good one to always remember for everybody, because we fall into that habit all the time. So don't assume anything, right? So always check and validate. But I would just say is the most important thing that you can do is go back and put yourself in outside of your bubble and look back in. And then maybe just do a short exercise saying, okay, if I was to come to me cold right now, or come to my company cold, or whatever, write down the 5 impressions that it communicates to me. Like, I know this is a difficult exercise because you might know yourself too well. But when you force yourself to step outside for a moment and look as a third party back in and say, what are the impressions that I am getting from this? And then ask yourself, does that align with the impression I want people to get, or the authentic impression that I really want to put out there? So I think you should do that, and not just do it once. You should do that consistently, because things change. And maybe you lose. Here's the thing, you've probably seen this too, Patty. People can lose control of their brand sometimes, because once it's up and running, they just think, it's ticking over and everything's fine.
That's because they think they control their brand. They don't control their brand. All they control is the branding, not their brand.
Exactly.
Brand is what other people say, share about you, right? So
and how I do it myself is, I think the other thing, as I said, is whether it's podcasting, like, listen to other people's podcasts. Like, you'd be surprised how many people have a podcast who never listen to other people's podcasts, right? Which is crazy. So listen to other podcasts. Watch your own podcast back. Sometimes it's always good, to see how you were doing, and go on other podcasts, as I mentioned before, to make sure. That's what I do. I go on other people's podcasts now as well, because it's always good. And I love, you do yours the way I'm like, this is great. I love the way Patty does hers. Absolutely. I learn from this. And that's the other thing I think is it's a choice. You have to be a continuous learner, right? You have to be a continuous learner. Don't assume that you got it down. Like, it's very easy for me sometimes to think, I've done like 2,000 whatever videos now. I've got this down. But no, I have to always remind myself, no, come on, John. Continuously learning, continuously looking at ways of improving. Yeah. And I think the last thing I would say to people is just rediscover your curiosity. That's and I'm stealing this I'm stealing this from a guest who was on my podcast, and I'm sorry I can't remember who, but she said curiosity is your superpower. It's a superpower that's unused by a lot of people, but rediscover your curiosity. And if you start to be really curious about what other people are doing, how they're doing it, how this is evolving, what's going on. What about Patty? Like, I'm let me curious about what she's doing with her. Just kind of almost like that childlike curiosity. That is so powerful, and it really grounds you and brings you back and makes you humble.
From a sales point of view, isn't that kind of what you want people to say? Oh, tell me more. They're like so curious. Right? Tell me more about that. I mean, like, from a sales perspective, like, I think that's probably like the best thing somebody could say to us, right?
Yeah, insatiable curiosity. But you'd be surprised sometimes. Like I said, it's not always something that we pay attention to, and we can lose it very easily, because especially as we get more seasoned in our careers, we can often sort of go, I kind of know what I'm doing and all of that, until you suddenly discover that, oh dear, things have changed and I didn't notice that, or things have slipped away. Yeah. So I would say, just rediscover your curiosity and just be curious. Just be as curious as you can be. And again, as I said from one of my podcast guests, it's a superpower.
And it really, really is. So, John, how do you see your work, right, for what you do, evolving to meet future challenges in the sales and marketing landscape? So, things change all the time. We get different trends all the time, right? Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But as somebody in sales and marketing, right, things are always evolving. So what's next for you?
I think is what we talked about at the very beginning or throughout most of this. And I think that is the return to a focus on human relationships and connecting as humans, because like I said, we use AI in and obviously we're a technology company and we believe in technology and we use a lot of AI. but we believe first and foremost in human relationships and making the world. The other thing too is we believe in the salespeople have a role as peacekeepers in this world, because when people and countries are trading together fairly, fair trade, you can't be in conflict. Like I can't ask you, say, here, I want to sell you this, and then like lob a bomb onto your house at the same time. It doesn't work, right?
For sure.
Yeah. And I think if there's something the world needs right now, it needs salespeople, because they're the tip of the spear in building relationships with people. Win-win relationships are coming back to that. But I think it's so incredibly important that we elevate sales and we elevate marketing people, and we realize that they actually have a really important societal impact in what they're doing, because at the end of the day, we're trying to connect people, right? We're trying to connect people to solve problems, to make people more successful, to help people and to uncover opportunities. So I think when you switch your mindset and you go, oh, actually, what I'm doing has a real, as I said, societal impact. And now more than ever, we need that. We need people to start rebuilding human relationships. Don't stop hiding behind technology. Stop trying to have these win-lose, like I'm going to get one over on you, because that's obviously the antidote to long-term relationships for sure. But anyway, like I said, is like look for win-win solutions and know that your role is a really important one. It's not just a paycheck. What you are doing has an impact on the people you're marketing to, the people you're selling to, and beyond that, to the people around them. Because everything we do, goes out like those, like the pond when you throw your pebble in the pond and the rings go out. It touches places that you're never going to know. So you might as well give it your best shot to do the best you can and to be as authentic as you can and to try and help other people. And here's one last thing, Patty, is enjoy it.
Absolutely, right?
Why shouldn't sales and marketing be enjoyable? Why shouldn't a sales interaction be enjoyable for both parties? Why shouldn't a marketing engagement be enjoyable for both parties?
I totally agree with you. Like, my criteria in everything I do is that it has to bring me joy and feed my soul. That is that doesn't work for me. That is where I'm at.
I think you just summed up in 2 words what I was rambling on about there.
I love it. This has been such a phenomenal conversation. I have really, really enjoyed it. For those of you that are listening or watching, you will see below that there are all the ways to connect with him. You will also see we put the link to his podcast and the white paper that he said that he was going to give you as a gift. You'll be able to just hit the link below. But with that said, I know if you enjoyed today's episode, and I'm sure you did, you're going to want to connect with John. So, John, what's the best way for people to connect with you? How would you like for them to reach out to you?
I mean, LinkedIn is the easiest, to be honest, Patty. But I would say one thing is, when you do reach out, if you heard me from this podcast, please put that in. Please just don't send a connection request. Please say, I heard you on Patty Farmer's podcast. That's going to do a number of things. Number one, it's going to tell me that it's not spam and you're not just trying to pitch me or sell me something, I hope. And second off, it's going to mean that you know who I am and you're doing a genuine outreach, just like what we talked about today. So I would say LinkedIn is probably the best, but please do mention where you heard me.
Perfect. So we're going to have all of his links below, so you'll have all of those ways to choose from. I was going to ask him where on social media does he hang out the most, but he just answered that already with LinkedIn. That's my favorite one as well. So thank you so much for spending this time with me, John. I really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
Oh, that is awesome. And to my audience, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. And if you enjoyed today's episode, and I am sure you did, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast on your favorite listening platform. And if you haven't checked out the magazine, Marketing Media Money Magazine, please grab your free copy at m3digitalmag.com. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. You have a phenomenal week. Bye now.
Thank you for joining us today on the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. To shorten your learning curve even more, make sure to grab your free copy of the Marketing, Media, and Money magazine. I promise your business will thank you.